And the work that we do in the D&I world isn't for us, unfortunately. It's for the next generation.
You're right.
It's to set up space. And I firmly believe that, the generation before us spoke to set up space for us to be able to have two women of color on a podcast talking about diversity and inclusion in the legal profession in the Middle East. Like, what?
Let's Talk DXB. Real conversations by real people.
Izzy, thank you so much for joining me for a Let's Talk DXB conversation.
You're so welcome. Conversations like this about what you talk about are very important. So it's my pleasure.
Thank you. And this was a conversation in the making probably 2 years ago, because obviously I sat in the back row and you were doing a talk, and it still sticks with me, a lot of the content that you were sharing, and we'll go into that and why. But before, I always like to intro the guests properly, and your experience is so extensive. I need to think about, where do I start? So you've worked at OSN, you've founded Freshly Ground Sounds as well, which helps with local talent within the UAE, music specifically. Head of Business and Legal Affairs for Netflix. You're a coach and consultant, and you've been doing that for a number of years anyway, supporting the creative community. So lots of experience when we think about media and entertainment, and obviously from the legal stance as well. Where did this passion come from?
Where did the passion come from? Well, I think I grew up in Abu Dhabi, and in this area of the world, combined with the cultures of my parents, I think we've been surrounded by storytelling without even realizing. And it's taken me, as you reeled off the list, I was racking my brains to think, what's the common thread? Quick, hurry up so you can answer. And I think one of the common threads, whether it's music and even law, which we can come into, and, all my work has definitely been global, but with a huge focus on this region. I think the passion has probably been embedded from an early age, and it's just taken different formats depending on what I'm into at the time. But the core has been storytelling in whatever format that is, music, film,
Fantastic. Yeah, I can definitely see the passion as well. I think when I heard you speak 2 years ago, I was like, so authentic and so passionate, and really wanting to give people voices to tell their stories as well, different cultures, races, genders. So that resonated with me. And one of the reasons I started Let's Talk DXB was really to profile diverse voices and opinions and have authentic conversations, because I wasn't seeing as much of it, to be honest. I've been in marketing, comms, media for quite some time now, and I felt like there's still more to be done when it comes to profiling different voices. So yeah, I remember that conversation so well, and I was like, let me see if I can get Izzy in the studio. Yeah, it really touched me. So thank you for sharing that. So let's go into your career and where it all came about as well, because you've dipped in and out, obviously legal background as well as creative producer. So how did that all come together?
Sure. You'll find a lot of kids that grew up in the UAE in the 80s and 90s say that they were quite heavily positioned to go into law or medicine or engineering, because those were, solid professions where you would go to university for a degree. There weren't universities here at the time, and especially from a lot of Eastern cultures, it's like, be a doctor or a lawyer. Yeah. For myself, personally, I went to study anthropology.
Oh, really?
So cultural anthropology. I added law at the end, so I left to London from here. And whilst I was there was a little bit of, law. If I get into law school, that would be kind of neat. And I did. But at the time, with the training contract format for the legal profession, my academics weren't strong enough to get a training contract per se. But I really had a passion for writing. So the storytelling is coming up again.
Got it.
And I thought maybe I want to be a journalist. Maybe I want to work in that area, the media part. And so I, pen paper, literally at the time, applied for internships a few places, and I got one at the Independent newspaper. Fantastic. And that was my first, break into this world now that I look back. And I spent 2 or 3 weeks there in the summer in London, and I kept looking at the lawyers being like, oh,
Yeah,
and
got
we
it.
used to go into the editors daily.
Oh, how
and
cool.
I saw the general counsel always giving this kind of quite measured advice, but they were all talking about something really, fun or
Yeah.
serious.
Yep.
It was the summer that Madeleine McCann went missing.
Whoa.
And there was a lot to navigate, of course. For the, it was chaos at the time. And so I remember being called into the legal team to proofread something. And then at the end, I asked the general counsel at the time, can I come here for a week and just watch? So that opportunity, actually, I then got referred to the BBC for their legal team as another intern, summer internship. And then off the back of that, I got offered a training contract at a firm a year or two later. So it was a bit of a
That's crazy.
unconventional route.
Yeah.
But what I was told later with Eversheds is that the application stood out because of that experience.
Yeah.
I didn't know that at the time. It felt very unconventional, but sometimes the unconventional routes stand out. So that was my route into law.
Got it.
And private practice that took me around the world, including Abu Dhabi, which we can come on to if you like, which was fascinating.
Yeah.
And then I moved in-house in 2000 and around 12, 13.
Right.
So, 11 years ago.
What cool experience from an internship that's taken you, that was just meant to be then, because...
Maybe.
Yeah, I think so, Izzy. Gosh.
Yeah.
And then obviously you kind of stayed within the legal industry, but on the side you were doing producing and the production side and the creative side as well?
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, it started out purely when I moved to an in-house role. The work-life balance was really nice compared to private practice. And I was in the UAE. I was back and forth with a law firm. And then when I moved in-house, I had a little bit of time to, I guess, a little bit more work-life balance.
Yep.
And I started to think about my music a lot because I played music from a young age,
Got it.
Encouraged by my dad. And I really wanted to find a space or a place in the UAE where I could play original music. And I couldn't.
Wow.
At the time, it was like cover bands in a lot of hotel venues. And the business model that was set up was cover bands, hotel venues. They can bring in money to fund the food and beverage and the bars.
Yep, got it.
And so, this is also a time where Dubai had very few cafes, coffee houses. And I approached a wonderful couple who are close friends of mine now who own the Roseleaf Cafe.
Oh, nice.
And the garden centre.
Yeah.
And just asked them if I could come along one Sunday and play some live music.
So you were actually playing live. Hold on, Izzy. Let's take a step back there.
Yeah.
You said encouraged by your dad. Was your dad into music? Or
Sang and I played the harmonium a bit. So
so this now makes sense. It's embedded then.
probably.
Yeah, got it.
Somewhere.
Oh, so you started to actually perform.
So I would just play like a few tracks here and there. They said, we don't have anything like this. Come in. And I said, do you have to worry? The lawyer in me is like, you have to worry about rules and permits. And they were like, no, just come play. It's like a little cafe, And there was no money exchange. It was just something that I wanted to do to maybe try and also recreate what I had experienced in London.
Yeah.
And there was no busker scene here at all.
Yeah.
Why would there be in Dubai? So I, at the time, every Sunday, so it was a Saturday, sorry, because that was the weekend then, it was a Saturday.
Yeah.
And more and more people showed up. More and more people said, this doesn't feel like, we've not seen anything like this in Dubai. And then within a few weeks, a few musicians approached me and they said, can we do this too? And I was like, yeah, of course. And it's not my, gig. And then I slowly discovered in the space of a few months, it must have been 2 months, that there was a real desire and need for the artists to express themselves and regional artists.
Yep.
And there was a real need and desire for the audience it was craving this.
Yeah.
And this was never intended to be a business. It was a community, a club. And But it grew so big so fast that I needed to formalize it in some way. And that's when I started to use my legal experience and say, what framework exists, what regulations exist, you know, how can this be used to help creatives express originality, what venues would support it. And then, within the space of a few years, it became business. We had over 650 or more than 650 artists.
Whoa.
We played across the UAE. We went to Bahrain and it was a whole thing.
And so organically as well.
Yeah, very unexpectedly.
Yeah,
very unexpectedly. It took me by surprise.
Yeah. But you know, I think it's so fantastic because you're operating through passion. And I always say, like, if you're able to find your passion and then be able to do something with it, sometimes it just blossoms into something you would never ever expect. And you took the bravery to put yourself out there first. So I think that always goes into something. Oh, I didn't know this about your history, actually. I didn't know that you were also a musician yourself.
Yeah, as I began to be more of an organizer, and as I began to, I would literally take lamps from my living room and like Persian carpets and make a stage. That's how we did it back then in Safa Park and in Wright Market.
I love it.
Not as it is now, but at the time. And so, you know, it was a fun thing to do. Then I realized that there needs to be some organization to this, some framework. So I had some really interesting talks with like authorities here to help figure out what we could do for local musicians or regional musicians. Yeah.
That's fantastic. I might jump ahead a bit because I think that leads into kind of the business side of like for creatives. So you have an idea and you're passionate about it. How do you then formalize it and structure it so it then becomes something a bit more organized, something a bit more professional? Because I think with creatives as well, you just think about, creating. You're like, I just want to create. But then there comes a time to, if you want to turn this into a business or make money from it, really being able to educate people in terms of how you do that. And I think that's what you've been doing through your kind of coaching and consultancy side.
Sure. I can definitely speak to that. So over the years, obviously, I was also growing more experience on my professional side. Yeah. And I did notice this gap because I've played with my brain in both the creative and the business side. I would just share with friends who are more on the pure creative side. Yep. And, so many of them said, oh, yeah, no, this is, I really need to know this. And you said something interesting earlier, like if you're a creative, how do you get onto the business side? And I actually think the answer is it's not always the case that a creative needs to. They can also outsource it. Not all creatives are meant to use all their headspace for the business part. Things can be outsourced, and that's okay. If you have a trusted business partner that appreciates your creativity, first of all, values, so actually likes what you do. That's important because they're almost your advocate and partner. But more importantly, values creativity. So to find a business partner that values creativity, because sometimes depending on the nature of your creativity, you should be able to 100% focus on that. If you have the means and also the economic means, which we can talk about. I don't think outsourcing is a bad thing. I think outsourcing can be quite empowering and liberating if you frame it like that. Rather than, I'm giving up the authority over my creativity. You can actually say, I'm empowering myself by being able to focus on my creativity. And there are different ways to do that. It could sound very expensive to some people if they say, does that mean I need to hire a lawyer?
Yeah, exactly.
But it's not 0 to 100. There's lots of in-between ground, and that is the exact space that I have found myself working in more and growing into, which is how the coaching and consultancy came about, because there is that in-between space that works well for creatives and works well for people like me, where I like to, dip between the two very often.
But I think also for you as well, it's fantastic because you are a creative, and then obviously you've got the legal side and the business side as well. So I think for you, merging the two, it's a no-brainer. So if you're working with a creative that you think their talent is good, you can fully understand what's needed on that side, and then equally how you have to structure things for it to be viable and longevity and all of these things. So it's great skill.
True. It's taken me about 15 years to crystallize how to merge the two. I would say that it's not an overnight thing. It's been a lot of, I can look back when you're talking about it now and be like, oh, I can see how these connected.
Right.
But I didn't see that
at the time.
Yeah. I was just in my car driving down Shakeside Road with a lamp in my boot, going to a gig. Yeah. So I didn't see it at the time, and it's important for me to say that because I'm very always conscious that it could come across someone starting out in their career as I can do this. But I do want to say it's taken 15 years to crystallize how the two meet.
And I can imagine, but I think that's the value, right? That's the gem right there now, because you've been able to see both sides. Because when I came across your profile as well, I was impressed at how much of a creative you are, but equally how talented you are in terms of like your business acumen and legal, because I haven't seen that type of profile before. And then obviously through the years, I think a big part of my Let's Talk, I've talked about having diverse voices and diverse profiles, and what I'm really trying to do is give a platform for the underrepresented, ethnic minorities, and where there's a story to tell, or just even where they can educate people, but equally other cultural backgrounds as well, where I can learn and others can learn from. So it's very much a diverse platform as much as possible. But when I look at the media industry from my own opinion and own experiences, I think it's not there yet, but it's been on a journey of being able to have different faces, different voices telling their stories in different ways, whether it's music, whether it's film, etc. So I wanted to tap into your brain a bit more from a creative standpoint, and probably even legal, because I'm also working in legal. I've been in law for about 10 years. What you've seen when we think about diversity within the industry?
Sure. I can speak to it from a UAE perspective.
That would be good,
because that's where we are.
Yeah.
I think I would like to sit back and say, oh, it's improved so much. I would say that it's very deep in the work in progress phase, and has been. I think upon reflection, I've worked for a lot of different global companies, both for their Middle East offices or branches or regional offices and HQs, and that's been a real privilege to be able to see relativity. Yeah. So, in a HQ sitting in London, when I was back and forth, HQ of X company could say, wow, we're really diverse. We've got a regional office in Hong Kong, and we've got a regional office in Abu Dhabi. We're in the Middle East. We're in Joburg. We're in Africa, right? And I would then be in said regional offices and be like, this is not diverse at all. So what I'm trying to say there is, number one, especially for global companies, I think there's a very easy surface level tick to say we're diverse. But really where diversity becomes inclusive work is when you're really in the thick of it and go a deeper level to say, okay, we have an office in X country, but how diverse is that office?
Correct.
But the most important thing is the sustainability of conversation, not just it's X month for X community.
It's not a campaign for the day or the week or the month.
Correct. It's not a campaign for the day, for the week, for the month. It's sustainability. It's having a 10-year plan. Because that's how long things can take.
Correct.
It's also, and I don't think enough companies and firms do this, it's also really making sure that all the way from leadership to all around the company, there's a fundamental understanding that inclusion is a good business decision.
Right.
It's good for the business. Time and time again, studies have shown that. And it's about how to turn up the volume on that conversation sustainably.
Yes, yeah.
And I don't know the correct answer to that, but one thing I have learned from diversity and inclusion work in lots of different industries and the places that the corporations that I've worked, and I've worked independently, is it's really important to celebrate the small wins.
Yeah.
Because getting tired, I mean, the number of conversations that I've had or interviews about diversity and inclusion and panels, I'm happy to talk about it because it's important.
Yes.
But it's also about celebrating the small wins.
Correct.
So I say it's work in progress because there are things that have improved.
Yeah.
I've been in rooms that I never would have dreamed of being in, that my mum would have dreamed of being in. And that's amazing. I now feel a lot more empowered, even though it's still difficult to speak up.
Yes.
Not only on behalf of myself, but behalf of others.
Others, yeah.
You know, and sometimes I share with, like, you know, my mom certain things. She's like,
You said that. Yeah.
You said that, you know? But it's important to celebrate the small wins and zoom out, because otherwise the work can get quite tiring.
Exhausting.
And so increasingly over the last 10 years, especially if we're talking about legal profession in the UAE, I feel really responsible.
Good.
I'll be vulnerable. It feels like a weight of responsibility sometimes, but one that I'm happy to carry because it is about the small wins. And even if this conversation inspires one young female lawyer who's, you know, either in the UAE or thinking about working in the UAE in the legal profession, then that's a huge win.
Yeah, fantastic. Do you know, and I think it's great that you're willing to take on that responsibility. And I say that from my own experience. I think, you know, when there have been these like D&I conversations, I've gotten better. And I think Let's Talk has helped me to be fully authentic and embrace who I am and my thoughts and opinions and respectfully, you know, accept others. But I used to be the type to shy away and be like, well, I'm the only black woman in the room and I don't want to come across and just be very vocal, but I actually think this, because I think that weight, carrying that weight as well can be quite consuming actually, and you have to be quite brave to do that, and it comes from a very genuine place. So I think for you doing that, knowing that it can support other women that look like you or other underrepresented communities, I think that is so powerful that you're doing that.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, whether it's Freshly Ground Sounds or this conversation, you and I, it's a form of a community.
Yeah.
And one of the cores of any community, and this is my anthropology degree speaking now, is you support each other.
Yeah.
And the work that we do in the D&I world isn't for us, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's for the next generation.
You're right.
It's to set up space. And I firmly believe that, you know, the generation before us spoke to set up space for us to be able to have two women of color on a podcast talking about diversity and inclusion in the legal profession in the Middle East. Like, what?
Oh, Izzy, when you put it like that, yeah.
It wasn't possible in the 80s. It wasn't possible in the 90s. There wasn't an audience for it. But now there is. And I think that's really important to celebrate and pause in the celebration. Because if you don't celebrate, again, I keep using the word tired, but it's true.
Yeah, I agree.
You know, it can get tiring, the work, but it's also important to remember why it should be celebrated and why it's important.
Yeah, that is fantastic. And I think also, obviously, off camera, we were talking about born and raised here as well. So you would have seen a lot. And I think just your profile, female, you know, from a different culture, ethnic background, and being so successful in your career as well. I think that is impressive for a lot of women, for me, definitely as well, because it shows it is possible for it to happen and for you to kind of break down those stereotypes. But it's not easy, I'm sure. Like, you probably would have had to face a lot of different dynamics to get to where you are as well. But I think it comes from an authentic place because you know what that journey looks like. I think also, like you said, having these conversations and the openness around it is all education. I think it all hopefully is encouraging for people that listen to this as well to know that there is a gap. What does that look like? And I think you're right, the small wins, because sometimes it's such a big thing, isn't it? So I think for people it's overwhelming. Where do we start? What does this look like? But I think the small steps to get there, intentionality is key. And obviously making sure that it's coming from an authentic place, like not a quota, not just to kind of look good from a PR stance, but generally embed it into the culture of your firm. And that's where you'll see that it makes such a difference.
Yes, cultural exchange. So, my question, if anyone is, in a leadership position in a global law firm, is where is the moment where you are sending associates, trainees, senior associates from the East to the global HQs for a few months to exchange learnings,
So
and to frame that to leadership about how crucial that is for the success of the business. Because that's always a question that gets, when I started Freshly Ground Sounds, when I started Usly, it's like, where's the business case?
Correct.
And so maybe that's one of the tools, if you want to work if you want to do I&D work in any corporation you're in, is don't forget the business case part.
It's important.
It's important for corporations, of course, they're businesses. And that's also something I've learned over the years as well. What's the business case? And I usually mention that probably somewhere at the top of the list when I'm trying to get something through. And even now, with my experience and my work, not everything gets through. Not everything gets received well. And that really sucks.
But how do you deal with that as well? Because I think for me, that's where I'm like, I don't think it's going to be received well, so I'm just going to be quiet. I think that's what it's been up until this point. I think I'm definitely on a journey where I'm like, I'm going to vocalize in a constructive way, and I'm going to share my opinions. But I think it was that fear of, this person might feel awkward, or it just will not be received well. So how do you overcome that?
Yeah. Wow. That question's never been asked to me before. How do I receive that? So it's definitely changed over the years. I would say that I&D work is not easy. It's not about putting on an event during a particular month. These things are real. So I feel othered, or I feel that this isn't right, or I see someone being treated differently, or I see underrepresentation, any of those things that you see. And there's something inside you, if you're a member of an underrepresented community, where you want to speak up. But the first thing that you'll probably do is second guess yourself.
Correct.
Standard. So, there are layers to this.
You talk yourself out of whatever you
So you talk yourself out of it. You're like, it's probably just in my head. You spend some time thinking about it. And slowly this seed is like inside you, right? This, I don't know what you would call it, fire, or this passion. Passion for equity. Passion for equity of rights, which every human should believe in. Not everyone does. And so how I deal with it now, and it may change if you ask me in 5 years, is I think selfishly, is this going to eat me up?
All right. Yeah, good. Yeah.
Am I going to suffer mentally because I haven't, is it going to sit on me that I didn't say anything?
And you're thinking about it constantly.
And I'm thinking about it constantly. I'm going to bed thinking about it. I'm waking up thinking about it. And most of the time, I can't give you a percentage. I'd like to say 99% of the time, but that would not be true. Most of the time, I feel better that I said something.
That's true.
Some of the times where there are, where it hasn't been well received, in fact, when it's been received with, Izzy, you're wrong. There's been, or Izzy, you're not seeing it from this perspective, or even defensiveness. Even when that happens, I'm still glad I said something.
I think that's it, isn't it?
And I'm like, well, at least I've said something, and I don't regret it. But I also want to be real that sometimes there can be real fears of consequences of, what if I lose my job over this?
Right,
That's a real fear that should never be discounted. So one layer that is each to their own is what is going on in your life.
Correct.
What is going on in your personal life? And can you afford to spend the energy on this?
Yes.
But what I would say is every single time I've gone through the pros and cons of whether things will be received well or not. And when things haven't been received well, I've never had an experience where it's worse than I thought.
Oh, okay. So maybe, we heighten it a lot more, right? So we think, I'm going to be fired on the spot if I do X, Y, and Z. So I think that's a good point, actually. And maybe it's the more that you vocalize, you get used to the different types of responses. Whether someone is defensive, someone feels awkward, or you're heard actually, and they think it's a great idea and whatever the initiative needs to happen. So I think you kind of condition yourself to the different types of responses. The more that you are quite passionate and open about kind of inclusivity and diversity, I think that's important.
Yeah, and finding allies or aspiring allies is important.
Yeah.
I would say that's especially in the context of working for law firms, corporations, organizations. Allies are really important.
Right. Yep. Yeah.
Validating, sometimes allies, depending, it doesn't always have to be a hierarchical ally.
Correct. Yep.
I've found that really helpful in my career.
Yeah, I think that is important as well. Because also you build like your own kind of safe space. If it is a corporate environment and you're trying to push D&I a lot more, but then you've got some people that also understand the objective, or you can go to and brainstorm, or, you know, am I overreacting? Is this actually what's happening? I think that's so important. Yeah.
And I would underline again, it really depends on what is going on in your life.
That's very good.
Really being selective about what I don't want to use the word battles. What issues you want to tackle. It's like if you've got a long to-do list, like, you know, just prioritize what you can do in that day or that month. So I always want to try and be very real when I talk about this stuff. Because it's important to be realistic as well. Having conversations like this, sharing within your community, for me, that gives me strength.
Yes, yeah. I think that's right, because a lot of people, you know, for me, there's been scenarios through the years and people are like, why didn't you do this? I'm like, well, you have to weigh it up as well. And I'm one person and, you know, maybe not everyone feels the same as I do. Am I willing to risk X, Y, and Z? Because I like the bit where you said about the reality of, you know, vocalizing or trying to bring in initiatives. If you're doing it by yourself, it can be exhausting and then you feel quite isolated. So I think you do have to weigh it up for sure.
And also removing or trying your best to remove any potential guilt for taking a break. Taking a break to recharge. In various organizations that I've worked at, you know, I've been all the way from face of I&D to head of this community, that community, but also taking a real proactive, explicit vocal break. Now, my community understands because recharging is important and I don't feel guilty. But those that don't understand it, aspiring allies or not quite allies yet, would be like, oh, you know, you were into that I&D stuff, but I know you don't do that anymore.
Oh, but it's always going to be there. You just need to have the strength to, because you're authentic. You're actually doing it. It's not like, oh yeah, I'll speak at this event and then I disappear until next year. Like you're actively, consistently trying to make changes, have conversations. That is exhausting. So it's not something you switch on and off, but you definitely need to step away sometimes to then come back feeling fresh and ready to have those conversations again.
Someone gave me some great advice a few years ago, which was also like, find cheerleaders, find your own personal cheerleaders in your life. Whether that's, you know, your partner, your siblings, your parents, close friends, a colleague that you've worked with for many years. Find a cheerleader that you can go to about this work. You know, let them be your hype machine, and potentially you can do the same for them. That's also another tip.
It energizes you as well. It definitely would energize you. Oh, you're so passionate about this.
I really am.
I'm like, I can feel it. I was like, you're so passionate about it, which is fantastic, because it's not an easy cause to do, particularly in big corporations, because you're trying to break down layers of like cultural changes, mindset. It's really difficult.
I would never consider myself a change maker. I'm surely passionate about equity. But, you know, at the end of the day, it's important to make sure that this work is not over-romanticized. So as you know, and when we were, before we started recording, I do a lot of stuff, and I've continued to do a lot of stuff, especially in this space, outside of my employers.
Got it.
I've always been explicit about it, so it's not like a secret or anything, but sometimes if I'm doing, let's say, D&I work in the context of any organization I'm working for, there are parameters. At the end of the day, you're an employer. Correct. You're working for a business. You need to during your employment, you need to stand up for the values of X, Y organization.
Yeah,
and
right.
that's what you're supposed to do as
basics,
an employer.
Correct.
The basics.
Yeah.
And sometimes, and I've seen this happen, some can feel like, there's a romantic notion of, oh, I have this space to be an activist.
Yep.
I don't see the work outside of my profession, outside of my employers.
Yeah.
Surely I can absolutely do that. But in the, I don't want to use the word confines, but in the framework of an organization, it's important to separate that.
100%.
Otherwise, what happens is you can get frustrated.
Correct.
And I'm sure, like, you're nodding, so I know that you've seen this.
Yeah.
Where like, oh, why can't we do this?
Yes.
Why can't we do this?
Yeah.
Why can't we do that? Well, actually, first figure out what the remits are that you can. And the stuff that you can't do within the framework of your organization, do it outside.
Do it outside in your personal
But different
time.
organizations might have different rules,
Yes.
especially, some of my friends in the past have worked for huge organizations, but their role is maybe public facing. So
Right.
they're limited in that sense.
Got it.
And so for me, I think how I have navigated this, because
Yeah.
I've worked for big organizations, is to really be explicit about, am I coming in the context of Izzy or Izzy working for XY company? So
Correct.
today I'm here as Izzy.
yeah.
And I think that's important. And equally, for organizations to be responsible
Yeah.
to relay that from the
Yes.
get-go. So
Yes.
we have this space.
Yeah.
It's not going to answer all your
Correct. Yes. Exactly.
questions.
Yes. Correct.
I don't see organizations do that. And unfortunately, a lot of us have to figure that balance out for ourselves.
Yeah.
And maybe there's something there
I think so.
for organizations to think
Yeah.
about when they talk about I&D.
Yes.
We
Yeah.
understand this is something that is important to you, not only as an employer, as a person,
individual,
as a human.
exactly. Yep.
There's not always going to be everything.
Yes.
This is the framework that you can operate in this space. If you are welcome to do work outside,
Yes.
as long as you're explicit that it's not in your capacity as an employee, for example.
least. Yeah.
I don't think law firms do that enough.
No.
And I think that's important as we're talking about it, all these ideas are coming.
Yeah, I was like, oh, Izzy, I think this is another thing. Because either way, you have to figure it out, or you become quite shy, or you shy away from, vocalizing it outside of your kind of 9 to 5 role. 'Cause you're like, oh, what's this person going to say? Is this okay with my company? Is this? So you have to then figure out, is it something I can do that I'm wholly passionate about and would like to make change and etc. Yeah, I think companies should be more open about that, actually. Yeah. Oh, Izzy, you've given so much information. I'm going to spin back a little bit for my own selfish reasons. So I'm definitely creating content. Someone that's been in the legal industry, very big on diversity and bringing diverse voices together. But if there was someone, and not even just underrepresented, kind of communities, but somebody that really wanted to go into the creative industry, has an idea. I have an idea. It's been playing on my mind for ages. How do I bring this to life? How do I structure it? Because we've talked a lot about the kind of business acumen and the business side and how you were able to merge the two together. How do I come with my full authenticity? Because we talked about who we are and the diversity and really embracing who we are. What would be the 5 tips that you could give someone that has an idea, is a creative and wants to go into the industry? That would be great.
Sure. And this is part of the work that I've been doing with my workshops and everything, of course. So I would say, first of all, if you have a creative idea, figure out what format you want that creative idea to be in. Anything from installation, painting, music, podcast, film, script, book. So the format is important because you have to enjoy that format rather than chasing a format that you think will work for an industry.
Yeah, makes sense.
Because there's a business model for every single format. You just have to know
what that is.
That is.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So we'll get to that. So first of all, the format that you enjoy, because ultimately with all creatives and all the creatives that I've worked with independently, like if you're enjoying it, it's probably going to go really, really well.
Yeah.
If you're trying to navigate it to fit in a certain box or format for others, it's probably not going to do as well as it could do if you're doing something you enjoy. So that's the format.
That's a good idea.
The second part then is figuring out your audience.
Yeah.
So, and your audience may be you. Like, you know, like I never really played music, you know, to go on a chart or anything. I played music for myself.
For yourself, right? Okay.
You know, so and that's okay.
Yeah.
But I know that we're talking about business, so we'll come on to that.
Yeah.
So figure out who your audience is.
Okay.
And then it would be the business element.
Right, okay.
But that is only, you know, why are you doing it? Are you doing it because you want a creative outlet to relax?
Yep.
Are you doing it for business reasons?
Yeah.
And by business, I mean money.
Yeah.
And we don't talk about money enough.
So true.
I have a whole module where I talk to creatives about money.
Oh, fantastic.
And how to talk about money.
Yeah, and be comfortable.
And be comfortable talking about money from the get-go, not just selling this creative idea to, you know, XYZ organization and then talking about money or asking about money later. It's very important to put a value on it from the beginning if you want to turn it into a business. So some people might want to do it purely for income. For income and passion. Some people might want to do it as what they call side hustle. Some people might not want to do it as that. And then another thing in business convention, very, you know, basic conventional business for investors. When I started up my first company, it's like, how do you want to scale, Izzy? Scale.
That's all we hear about.
All you about scale. I would say, especially in the creative industry, it's not about scale always.
Okay.
And that's like a little bit of a reframe. And when I have the business sessions with creatives, it's really thinking about it like that. Like how do I scale? Well, do you want to scale?
That's a good point.
Because creative work is sometimes about the impact. And with creative work, you don't necessarily need to measure impact through scale. There are other ways. If you think about cult films, if you think about one-hit wonders in the music industry,
you're right.
That's not about scale. So then there's that. And then the other part is how do you balance as a creative if you're going to turn your creativity into a business?
Right.
How do you balance the creative and the business part?
Right.
And one piece of advice that I sometimes give to creatives is it's okay to outsource that.
That's good.
And don't feel like you're giving something up by outsourcing it. Feel like you're empowering yourself because you can spend all your headspace on your creativity, which will really, you know, make your passion shine. Now, conventionally, especially like we'll talk about the UAE, like Abu Dhabi being my hometown, conventionally, you know, in the 90s or early noughties, and even now, if a creative was thinking about, you know, I want to see the business side or the legal side, I have to hire a law firm or a consultant or a law firm, and you immediately think of like
cost.
But it doesn't have to be like that, you know? And that's the space that I operate in.
Fantastic.
And I think that's going to grow because there is a need for it. And I think it's very important, what I would say to creatives is find a business and or legal advisor, and they can be two different people. If you want to outsource it, that first of all, likes what you do. That's very important. Second of all, close second is values your creativity. So understands how and why you want to put a value mark, so a number on it, if we're going to talk about money. And actually it's a partnership. And rather than you seeing it as a creative as, I'm giving something up, you're actually giving yourself more power because you're like, well, I've got this business person in my corner.
To help me navigate, because obviously not everyone is business minded. Creatives, they've got these great ideas, but then how do we structure it in the right way? So I think that's fantastic. I say to creatives, when I talk about like making their story their business, and especially when I do the script to screen workshops, is the minute that you write a sentence or first sentence of a lyric
book or a script, you've actually started a business without realizing.
Oh, that's empowering. That's encouraging, actually.
Yeah.
Oh, what do you think of that? Yeah. Okay. And it's just how do you bring it to life? How do you structure it?
Yeah.
Izzy, well, I need to talk to you off camera. There's too many gems here. Thank you so much for your time. You definitely lifted my spirits up. I've learned so much from you. So thank you for taking the time.
You're very welcome. And I want to say thank you to you too, because sometimes when history is relayed back or something is relayed back,
Right.
now I'm only seeing some dots being connected. So I want to say thank you to you too for highlighting some stuff. I'm like, this came about because of that.
Right?
Yeah.
Everything comes together for a reason. Full circle.
Full circle.
2 years later, but this conversation was definitely in the making then. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome.
Let's Talk DXB. Real conversations by real people.